So what we're doing when we're cooking this brisket is two basic things. One, we're trying to separate the fat solids from the fat liquids, right? And then two, we're trying to break down the connective tissue. So this gets deep, and we can go into this for a little while. Let's talk about separating the fat solids from the fat liquids, okay? So when we get done with this brisket and we go cut into it, there's gonna be a bunch of clear liquid draining all over this cutting board, and that's fat. That's not juice, that's not blood, that's fat from the meat, okay? That's draining out. This is all fat solids and fat liquids mixed together, that fat cap, right? And so we want to separate it. We want to make it two different parts. We want to remove the fat liquids and allow it to dissipate throughout the entire meat. And then we want to leave the fat solids. That's what tastes good at the end, right? That happens with heat, and heat only. That's the way it happens. It's just like you're clarifying butter, anything else. Is you remove those two things and separate those two things. That starts to happen at about 110 degrees when we're cooking, okay? The other thing we're trying to do is break down the connective tissues. A brisket's made up of two muscles. There's the top, we call it the point, or we call it the fatty, and then there's the bottom part. And we call that the flat, and we call it the lean. So these are two muscles that are attached together by connective tissue. Now connective tissue is gonna have its strength based on how much that cow moved around, how much motion it had, and how much strength. So if you look at someone who, like look at an Olympic athlete, for example, I'm willing to bet that their connective tissue in their knee is a lot stronger than my connective tissue in my knee because I only run when I'm chased, right? And they run for fun, And so like the more and more you work that connective tissue, the stronger it's gonna get. And so what we're trying to do on this is there's connective tissue in the center. There's two kinds of connective tissue in all animals. One of them turns into collagen, which is that beautiful fatty stuff right in the middle of the brisket when you're done. And the other one's called elastin, and that's that little rubber bandy looking thing on the bottom of a chicken leg, right? No matter what you do to that elastin, it'll never break down. But collagen can begin to break down right around 180 degrees-ish. Yeah. Sidetracked, right? Yeah. All right, so we're talking about breaking down the connective tissue in the fat. Again, the fat's gonna start to break down at about 110 degrees. That's gonna start to separate at that 110 degrees mark.
We're talking about this.
Yeah, that's the fat, right? This right here is actually, looks like fat, but that's connective tissue right there. And you can feel it. It's as hard as a rock. It doesn't feel like fat. It's like, it's really hard. And that's the main thing we need to break down. And like I said, that can start happening at 185 degrees. It can finish happening all the way up to 225. We see it happen almost at like 250, right? And so you don't know exactly when that's going to be broken down. You need to wait until it's done.
Until it's done.
It's moving.
Yeah.
That's when the process starts. And sometimes it needs to get a lot hotter, depending on, again, the strength of the connective tissue. Sometimes it happens a little colder. But that is the basic concept of what we're trying to do when we're cooking this brisket, is separate the fat solids and weaken that connective tissue, break it totally down, and so that it's an edible piece of meat. If we took this piece of meat, put it right on a grill, it'd be like eating shoe leather. It has to be cooked for a very long period of time. There's different recipes to deal with a brisket. You can make London broil and like put it in an oven and cook it for a long time, and it kind of turns into pulled pork. Or what we do is we make a barbecue Texas style brisket, and that's just cooked low and slow. We talk about connective tissue. And one thing that I know just from experience that I haven't really seen documented and I haven't heard a lot of people say, but with connective tissue, if you are trying to break that connective tissue down, one thing it does need is a consistent heat. You can start off hot and slowly go down low. And you can start off low and slowly get up hot. Or you can start off at one temperature and stay the same way. But the second the heat starts going like this with connective tissue, up and down, that connective tissue starts contracting and decontracting and contracting.
And that's when you call us.
And that's when you call me and you say, it's not cooking.
I need a brisket.
I don't know what to do. So we want that fat to separate and drop down into the meat. I've had some arguments with people on whether or not these briskets lose fat out of the fatty part of the brisket. And I've won every one of those arguments because I've walked them out to my smoker and I've shown them all of the fat that is sitting in the bottom of my smoker. And that comes from these briskets, right? I'm not dumping it into the bottom of the smoker. It comes from the briskets, right? It doesn't come from the top of the briskets. When we open up the smoker, there isn't fat like water following over the top of the brisket. It's dropping out of the bottom. It comes out of here. Now, why is that all important? Okay, so I know that that fat inside of that meat, when it drops out, it needs to be replaced with something, okay? So it's going to be replaced with what's around it. It's going to be replaced with the fat cap of the fat that's dropping down from the bottom here and getting absorbed. It's going to be absorbed up. This top fat is what ends up in the fatty part of the brisket. Now, what if you wrap it? What's it going to absorb? If you're wrapping, you're steaming, right? And so what's there? Water pressure being absorbed into the brisket, okay? And so the biggest problem with wrapping is you're going to replace fat with water. Why is that a terrible thing? So I've studied a lot on flavors and how they affect the human body, okay? Your body and your mind is equating moisture with fat. When you say, oh, that's a moist steak, that's a fatty steak. That's what your tongue is telling you, that there's moisture in that steak. Chicken, pork, white meats, it's liquid. It's actual liquid. But in beef, it's fat. You are equating moisture with fat. So one thing that is super important for the mouthfeel and the enjoyment of our customers is not to replace any of this fat with water, right? It's important that we get the fat into the brisket and not water. So we never put a water pan in our smokers because we're not looking to steam our briskets, and we never wrap them because we do not want that fat replaced with water. The steam is supposed to exit the brisket. It's supposed to be a dry cooking process. If you add a wet process to that dry cooking process, it's never going to caramelize properly, and the fat will never break down properly. And that is just an absolute truth, and that's why we believe very strongly, and we just don't ever wrap them, ever. And then for the same reason, why we allow this, why we don't trim them, is because this is our flavor, right? We want to get this fat to have as much flavor in it as possible so that the fat can drop down into the brisket. And the fat can make the brisket taste salty and taste beautiful. And so we don't need to season all the meat, we just season the exterior, and that's going to absorb enough.